Good day, everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar on the 3 myths of MDM implementation. My name is Bill O'Kane, and I am the VP and MDM strategist for Profisee, an MDM software vendor. I'll be joined today by Prasad Gadib, Vice President and Practice Head of Enterprise Data and Insights for Compunnel Digital, one of our premier partners in this MDM space. So let's get right into things with busting these 3 myths. So the 3 myths that we'll outline are that high software costs, extended implementation times, and the idea that MDM can be done by IT alone. Then we'll hear from Prasad in some detail about Compunnel Digital's MDM expertise and practice and how they can help provide value to your organization. We will do a small level set on MDM to begin with to make sure we're all on the same page as far as definitions go. A little bit about myself, similar to Prasad, who will introduce himself when his section starts. I've been in the MDM game since before it was called MDM. I was involved in a very large project back in 2001 that resulted in some software that is still on the MDM market today and one of the leading pieces of software. I was also involved in 2 of the other leaders of the market's software development activities. All the way up until 2008. And in 2011, I went to work for Gartner. Some of you may be familiar with Gartner Research. I was the lead MDM analyst for master data management software and programs for 8 years. Joined Profisee in June of this year, again, to help them with their MDM strategy and just overall direction of the company. So let's dive right in. So just to make sure we all are talking about the same thing when we say MDM, these are questions that you would think a lot of corporations, if not all of them, should be able to answer pretty easily. And if you ask a lot of them casually, if they can, they will say yes and throw out some broad numbers. But if you ask them if they can prove it, I've generally found that they really have trouble doing that in large part. Even to ask how many customers, especially if they have multiple regions or lines of business or even products, they can have trouble adding them all up and aggregating them across those things. Same thing with vendors and suppliers, for example, or assets or products, as I said earlier. Figuring out if 2 vendors are the same as each other based on an invoice pair, it can be quite daunting or even impossible. And therefore, how much do we buy from each vendor becomes impossible to answer. And again, these are just examples. So the way that you get to be able to do this in a trusted way is by doing master data management. So let's talk about what master data is just from a definitional standpoint. So again, we're all on the same page here. Master data is that data in any organization that has 2 characteristics, and there are 2 terms of art that I'm going to use, and then I'll explain it. Master data is data that's slowly changing and widely shared. So the terms of art there are slowly and widely. One organization slowly may not be the same as another's, and one organization's widely may not be the same as others. But in general, it is slowly changing data that describes the core entities of a business, like customer, product, asset, location, supplier, those types of things that don't change every time there's a transaction or an interaction or any other kind of business event. They tend to stay static. They can change slowly, but it usually is very slow. For those of you that are data modelers in the audience, if you were to take a star schema of an entire enterprise and pull out the fact tables, pretty much everything that's left would be master data generally. Now, ERPs and CRMs and other business applications tend to store versions of master data. For example, an insurance claim system probably has the insured's name and address on the claim record, but it's generally not the system of record for data like that. Those addresses and names are pulled from somewhere during the claim adjudication process and captured at a point in time. And as such, those systems are not the system of record for the overall version of that master data at any current point in time. So I hope that's clear. So that's our definition of master data: slowly changing, widely shared, heavy affinity with dimensional data, and that'll help us to sort of talk about the rest of this. And so that's why it becomes beneficial for enterprises to manage this data as tightly as they can and govern it. You'll hear the phrase data governance out there as well. I'll use it later here. That's why they get such value out of it, is that it is used in many places and it needs to be consistent across time and across applications and business silos. So the first myth of doing all this, and again, I've been doing this since 2001. I would say MDM hit as something with a name around 2006 or 7. but there's still a lot of misconceptions out there about it, and there's a reason that a low percentage of organizations actually adopt it successfully. By percentage, I mean the proportion of those that could get benefit out of it versus those that actually do. Gartner's estimate is that there's about a 10% penetration of the addressable software market, which is very low. So the first myth that keeps people from doing this is they think it's just going to cost a ton of money. So the average price of a perpetual license for a piece of MDM software does hover around $1 million US, and the services can run 2 to 3 times the software cost in some cases. At Profisee, we've developed a very uh, uniform, single code-based product. It's not, for example, a bunch of other things that we acquired and integrated together. A lot of the other MDM vendors buy things by domain, for example. They buy a customer MDM product. They buy a product MDM vendor. Uh, they may buy a supplier MDM vendor, and they integrate these things as best they can, but they have to recoup their costs. So again, that generates this kind of domain-based pricing that I'll come back to later that results in these big price tags. But as you can see here, Profisee's MDM platform has all of the standard critical capabilities that are expected from an MDM system and tool and solution, but we tend to be an order of magnitude lower in price because it was built from the ground up as opposed to being bought and assembled. We like to say, if all of our competitors could start over, this is what they would do. Uh, they all know how to do MDM, but they've built this sort of baggage to getting to where you need to be as an implementer. And to provide all this functionality, they've kind of taken what in some cases are best of breed things, but they've had to integrate them at great expense. So when they go to sell it, they go to recover. And again, we'll go back to recovering by data domain in a little bit. But just overall, it can cost a lot of money if you go to some of the leading vendors out there quite easily. At Profisee, the way we get around this or go right through it is to sell very easily adoptable starter versions with an ability to scale up or in terms of capabilities very quickly. So we start off at one end of the spectrum with what we call our essentials version, which is really just core MDM, storage, data modeling, and then optional matching. And we sell this through our inside sales team. And if your organization is of the right size, you can even do a free trial for 30 days. That's become quite popular. This is actually selling pretty well at the moment. Again, it has a fairly modest set of functionality. The matching is optional. It's really more about getting that stuff sort of stored and the data quality rules executed and all that. The next one up from that is the application version, which is sort of the product and supplier MDM kind of thing where you don't necessarily need to do matching, but you have a heavy workflow requirement. This is meant to service things that often in an enterprise already have a pretty tightly controlled business process behind them. They just need to be able to automate that process. So it's got the core MDM stuff that Essentials has. We also put in integrator to help with connecting to other systems and a workflow component to do what it sounds like to help author the data and maintain the data as it's going through its life cycle. Then we move from there to GRM, Global Records Management, which is really, again, the application version plus the matching capability. So now if you want to do what we'll call consolidation style MDM, which we'll get to a little bit later, this can do that. And then we have their enterprise version, and that also includes some of the other capabilities. Enterprise is really GRM and application functionality together. That usually comes into play again for multi-domain implementations, which we'll get to in a bit. And again, we don't charge by domain, so it's really just around functionality and how much data you're going to have in terms of rows and columns. So again, our main price drivers are functionality. So again, we went through the different functionalities here. You go from core with matching to core with integration and workflow to core with integration and matching, and then finally everything in the Enterprise Edition. And I should point out that that Enterprise Edition is still extremely modestly priced, probably an order of magnitude less than you would pay the leading mainstream MDM vendors that everybody thinks of, because again, they've had to build these solutions by buying other companies. And again, we don't charge by domain. I'll come back to that in a second, and why that's important. But we do charge by records and data elements. So that's columns and rows. If you want to get really simple, think of an Excel spreadsheet containing all your master data, and as it grows in terms of rows and columns, eventually you get to a tipping point where we do charge more, but it's pretty large. You know, our initial license is actually pretty generous in terms of what you're allowed uh, to store before we ask you for any more money. But we don't have domain limits. And that becomes important later, because what I'll talk about next is the fact that business processes or MDM outcomes that are helped by MDM or enabled at all by MDM, tend to be those things that require more than one domain. So customer data by itself is generally not enough to solve a problem. That won't give you a customer 360, for example, to serve customer service or sales or whatever it is. Neither will product data by itself give you the ability to do an inventory. You'd need location data and all of that. So again, I'll come back to that, but that's important because if you target anything reasonable in terms of a business outcome, you're going to hit multiple domains. And if you have a company that says, okay, I'm going to charge you $500,000 US for your first domain, oh, you need three attributes of the product domain or the location domain, I have to charge you another $500,000, regardless of your number of rows or columns, because I charge separately by domain, and I had to buy a product, MDM product, and I need to recover that cost. So it's a separate license. And eventually you could get to an enterprise license, but those are generally in the multiple millions of dollars by then. So again, we'll come back to that idea of business requirements and multiple domains next. And that feeds right into myth number 2, which is that you need many, many years to do this, multiple budget cycles, you know, risk it every year that you won't get extended, and that people lose interest and they'll think no value is being added. So, you know, what do we do about this? So Profisee is actually a multi-domain platform, which means it's data model agnostic in our case, which means in turn that you can model anything that you can think of in terms of a master data outcome. And what I mean when I say model an outcome is, as I said earlier, you would need, for example, to do cross-sell and upsell, you might need customer data and product data to be mastered. You don't really want to pay for each domain separately in that case. And if you work your way over to supply chain optimization towards the right, there are 4 domains. And again, these are just guesses and they're probably conservative. It might be more than this, but you'd need at least those 4 domains to do a modest implementation. And by that, I mean attributes from those domains. So columns from those entities would be necessary, probably keys and a couple of other things. So the idea is, in a traditional licensing scheme for MDM, you'd have to buy 4 domains to do this, even if you only needed a couple of attributes from each domain. And that's when the first myth arises, that MDM is really expensive. The second myth is that it takes a really long time, because the corollary to that first myth is that I have to master everything in a domain before I get any value. Not only is that not true, you're probably not going to get any value just by mastering one domain, even if you master all the source master data that it contains. You'll have to do more than that to get any value as well. So the idea here is not just that you need multiple domains for business outcomes, but we sell a data model agnostic tool that only requires you to model the attributes you need from each domain. So back to the idea that we only charge for rows and columns, you might only need 10 attributes from customer and 5 attributes from product. And, you know, all of a sudden your 100,000 customers or 500,000 customers or 1 million customers gets a little less expensive because you have less attributes than it would be otherwise. So again, you know, 80% of our customers confront this problem head on. They use this platform to do it. It is model agnostic, so they, by themselves or with help from us or one of our partners, such as Compunnel, can do the data modeling. And often it helps to have a partner do that, I think, especially these days. Data modeling is kind of a scarce resource, and partners like Compunnel can certainly help with that. But again, I want to leave you with the idea that you need multi-domain functionality to do any sort of business outcome in MDM. And we also happen to enable that with domain-free pricing, so that we're not immediately asking for more money the minute you decide you need a second or third or fourth or fifth domain. We actually have one client that masters 10 domains, and they don't pay really any more than they would for one, unless their data volumes get to a point in terms of rows and columns where that becomes necessary. So I hope that's helpful. I said I would come back to this. This is another way to look at how MDM adds value and how to get value quicker so that it doesn't take multiple budget cycles and multiple years. So when one style of MDM, and I think this is another sort of mini myth, is that MDM is all centralized, that you can only do MDM if you have a dedicated user interface that owns the data as the system of record, and it's also the creation and entry point, and it can't be done anywhere else. And that's it. We get control of the data. We have centralized data quality rules. No bad data ever gets created again. And this is actually a real thing. It does occur, particularly with product data and supplier data, things that, as I said, already have a business process very likely underneath them. It's just not automated or automated well. So again, this does exist. Uh, a hallmark of this, as I said, is that the governance tends to be very strict with this. The business has to get involved. They have to know what the rules are or dictate what the rules are. And we'll come back to business involvement in the third myth. So these things are all intertwined. But that does exist. But however, it's not the only way to do MDM. In reaction to that early on, there was this idea of a registry, which is, your master data doesn't even get put into a master data hub. It merely gets cross-referenced by a database that points to all the identifiers in the source and target systems. This is actually much quicker to do. There are some problems with it. You can't really get very tight governance with it because the data is still being authored. Meaning it's being created or maintained in the source systems, and whatever rules they had, you can try to get them changed, but there are often technical and political resistance to getting that done, and it often fails in that way. The one exception to this is healthcare companies that still sort of prefer this idea. So you'll hear about EMPIs or enterprise master patient indices because they often store sensitive data and they'd rather point to it from MDM than actually store a copy of it because now they have to secure that copy. So again, still done, but mostly in the healthcare industry. Other industries have tended to abandon this. And so, this sort of one happy medium was reached, and I referred to this earlier as consolidation style MDM. That's where sort of MDM gets built, it gets put downstream, and for a while it functions as sort of an operational data store. It's third normal form, it's optimized for transactional reads and writes, but it's not sending data back to the source systems. And as you can see, the important thing here is really the direction of the arrows. So we started off with MDM authoring the data and sending it out unidirectionally. We looked at registry with those dotted lines because there isn't really any data. There are just identifiers moving in and not back out. In consolidation, now not only the identifiers are moving in, but we're starting to make decisions about where the best email address, where the best person's name, where the best org name, where all of that is, and we start to store it. And we keep a record of where it came from. But again, we're not sending data back out in this scenario. We're only sending it further downstream. And the most common scenario where organizations provide first value is in a set of analytics platforms like data warehouses, data marts, anything like that, cubes, whatever it might be. This is often the first place the newly qualified master data that's 100% trusted is now surfaced to the quote unquote public in an organization is here, where they say, wow, that's much more accurate. How'd you do that? And eventually they say, can I get access to it in real time? And then you end up in coexistence where the UI is now read-write. Some of the attributes are actually authored in MDM, but some are still in the source systems. And often enterprises stop here because this is where they find that they get the most value for their money, and they decide they can't really build a business case, and we're going to get to that next, to go to centralized. Because if you kept going with coexistence and kept making more and more attributes authored with an MDM, eventually you would reach centralized. It's sort of a continuum in that way. So that's the idea. It doesn't take years to get to consolidation style MDM, for example. That should be, in our world, Profisee actually has many implementations that delivered value in less than 3 months. And honestly, the way that happens is usually in consolidation style, because we do have some that start in centralized, but in consolidation style, there's not a lot of invasion to the source systems. You're just taking data from them. You might be reporting some data quality problems, but you're not asking them to change their API calls or their service layer or their database or anything like that. So, source system owners are usually okay with this. It's only when you get to the next two that you start to ask them to do things differently. And again, it can take longer to do that, but that shouldn't stop you from providing value in a reasonable amount of time and proving the worth of this. And particularly at Profisee's price point, you should very well be able to justify the purchase. So again, just to close this out, I often used to get this question. There is no, what's the best style? There's no best style, and in fact, if you're doing multi-domain MDM, if you think back to the slide with the customer and product and all of that on it, you might be in one. You'll very likely be in one domain for one, or one style for one domain and another style for another. For example, you might be in centralized for product data and consolidation style for customer data at some particular point in time, and each of those may change over time. Eventually, you might be in coexistence for both of them a year after that. So again, this is a fluid thing. It's actually a continuum. Uh, it's not, choose one and target it and go for broke. Uh, that used to be how things were done, over a decade ago, but not anymore. Everybody's gotten very literate about these things. And so this is the kind of pathway that you should pursue. And you may have hybrids of these styles. I generally shy away from that idea because then everyone says they're hybrid. But again, if you think about things in this way, you can more readily see how to add value early. And again, Profisee can handle all of this. It's model agnostic, it's integration agnostic. So again, you should be able to use the same platform through all of this journey and all of the domains. So just one last slide to bust this myth up that it takes a really long time to do this stuff, multiple years and multiple budget cycles. We actually have a demo that starts off, it uses our platform as a service version, which is will be GA in a couple of months, and it can run on premise or in the cloud, Azure, AWS. When it's fully ready, it's actually very close as we speak today. But we can start with a raw server environment, an app environment in Windows. We can download a container, configure the database and service layer, and then deploy the essential solution that I talked about before. That's pretty pared down. And we are able to load. We chose the product domain. We're able to load product data, build into a model, generate forms and views and data quality rules, and show hierarchies of products. We then can take that and develop a fast application on it to do supply chain management. Let's say we could do a bulk update, attach unstructured files like documents and photos to those products. Again, show that in a hierarchy. Then we upgrade to enterprise solution merely by applying a new license key file. Same physical hub, no moving of the data, no migrating of the data from one hub to another. And then we restart the container, we reboot it, and we deploy the customer domain. And in this case, what we do is we integrate it with a real-time Salesforce.com implementation. We run some matching on it, we do some stewardship, and then tell Salesforce to do a native merge of a few duplicates, and we can do all that in 10 minutes from a raw server. So we're able to demo that for our clients all the time and our prospects. So again, this idea that it takes 6, 7, 8 months to install a piece of software and get it working is actually true in some MDM vendors because they have very big products, again, that they had to sort of amalgamate from multiple vendor purchases that they made. This was all built from the ground up. So again, we like to say if they could start over, they would build it this way because it's just what makes sense. And that sort of leads us to the last myth that I'll bust here before I hand over to Prasad, is that MDM is an IT project. First of all, MDM is not a project at all. It's a program. So if you hear MDM referred to as a project, you're probably already at some risk because projects have beginnings, middles, and ends. And MDM really doesn't have an end, particularly when you bring data governance into the picture. So the first thing we talk about to get the business involved, because it will have to be, it's a business program. When I was an analyst, we used to call it an MD, a technology-enabled business discipline. And that gives you an idea. So we at Profisee talk about it in this way. We talk about what, how, and why. And the reason this is critical, it sounds sort of trivial, but it's not. This is the biggest problem that our clients face. And in all my years as an analyst, about 80% of my activity was helping people sort through this. So we like to steer adopters over towards the why. What are the business reasons you're doing this? And you can read them there. They're probably familiar to most of you. The reason we put this up is because usually when we ask why someone wants to do MDM, they answer with with the items in the what column here on the left. Those are all great architectural principles and IT infrastructure concepts, but they are not business cases. So what I used to do is say to people, if I gave you a 360-degree view of the customer tonight, what would you do tomorrow? Because that's what I want to know. Because if you don't know that, you don't even know what's in your 360-degree view. And it starts to make sense after a while, but it's really easy to get caught up in this, sort of the what versus the why and how. So if we were to explode that why a little bit, we'll just give some more examples here of business outcomes under the why. Generally, they fall into this sort of categorization. We'll get to a little simpler one next that I find very effective. Obviously, on the left is increased revenue and in the middle is reduced costs. And then we can talk about mitigating risk. Risk is a much increasing topic in popularity around MDM these days, as you can imagine. And in fact, I would make the statement, even historically, that the more regulated an industry an organization participates in, the greater the probability they've either done MDM or are looking at it or have plans to look at it. So again, I won't read all these, but this is just sort of a blowout of the last column, the Y column of the previous slide. And again, more examples of reasons people do this that are really good business targets. And again, this will lead back to multiple domains and back to the cost and back to the time it takes to do it. So I came up with this a while back and kind of codified it since coming to Profisee. This is sort of a quadrant way of thinking about benefits. And I would say for me, this is the slide that most of my clients ask to keep after I talk to them so that they can reuse it. So just think of the x-axis and the y-axis. Below the y-axis is saving money and above it is making money. So in the same way accountants use that terminology, above the line and below the line, that's what this reflects. On the left side of the x-axis, the vertical axis, you'll see current suboptimal processes. That's stuff we do now, but we don't do it very well. So it could be anything from usually maybe cross-sell it to customers during service interactions. We do it, but we're clumsy. A lot of times we make people mad or alienate them. We try to sell them things they already own or things they've already told us they're not interested in. And it may damage us overall. It may generate some customer churn, for example. On the right side of this vertical axis are things we can't do at all. So making money, saving money, things we do now but not well, and things we can't do at all. The reason I like this graphic is because, and I'm the worst offender. When I was in IT, I was an IT architect for years. I did MDM implementations myself 6 or 7 times, usually successfully, but I'm as bad as anybody else. If you let me do whatever I want, I'm going to sit in the lower left of this diagram. I'm going to try to save money by fixing things that are broken. And the reason I do that is because 2 reasons. One is I know I can do it. And 2 is I don't have to talk to a lot of people to do it. I don't have to depend on other people. I can decide what's important and then execute it and probably be a hero. The problem with this in the MDM world is that that's seldom enough to pay for an MDM program. Now, with a vendor like Profisee, the costs are a little more modest, so this is not as cut and dry as it could be. But I would say it still holds true that if you stay down there, you will generate real benefit. But when all is said and done, you won't have a net positive return on the investment. So in more mature environments, we like to see people concentrate and we help them. I'll show you how shortly. We actually help them and help our partners. We have something called a business impact roadmap that helps the business collaborate with IT to come up with net new things that make money. To be blunt about it is, you should still do this stuff on the lower left and you should still track it. I'm not saying to blow it off entirely and not do it, but the upper right is where all of the payoff is. And in fact, you hear about digital transformation, that's where it resides, in the upper right of this diagram. You may get some out of all the other quadrants here, but again, those companies that have really transformed themselves, sometimes with my involvement as an analyst and as an implementer, we're really up in that upper right. What is it? Yeah, we're going to take care of all that other stuff down there as almost as a byproduct, but the main thrust is that upper right and not the reverse. Not we're going to fix all this stuff and make things more efficient, and while we're at it, we might get some transformational value out of it. You actually want to look at it in the reverse direction. So I hope that's helpful. The negative way to look at this is if you don't have a business involvement and you're trying to do it alone as IT, this is the number one reason these things fail, is that there's not a framework that cataloged the benefits, whether they're bottom up or top down. Top down example is an ERP re-engineering project that requires data analysis to get done, or a CRM implementation. Bottom up is all these things that break all week, every day, and how much they cost every time they break, and how many people it takes to fix them, and how it delays our order to cash process or things like that. Whether it's bottom up like that or top down like a big re-engineering project, the failure to document MDM's benefits to that, and this is key, get ratification, get sign off by the business on both the fact that value exists and how the prioritization was done. What's going to happen first, what's going to happen second, what's going to happen third, from a deliverable standpoint, not an infrastructure standpoint, it becomes critical. So again, we want collaboration, communication, and clarification around the program so that everybody knows what's going on, especially outside of IT. And in some cases, you might not even want to say data or MDM to your business stakeholders. You might want to just talk about what the deliverables are process-wise, like the cross-selling and upselling, better customer service. I like to tell people the best MDM program I was ever on was called 21st Century Account Opening. So again, the business had no idea that MDM was involved. They didn't care. All they knew was on Monday morning, a whole bunch of things were going to be automated. Duplicates would be detected and prevented. They wouldn't be able to create a bunch of bad data, and they were happy with that. And that's sort of what makes sense there. So what we do at Profisee for our customers and prospects is, again, free of charge. We go in and we use a combination of some research. We have a guy here named Mark Montaro that does this full time for us. He's been doing it for us and for others for about a dozen years now. He's taken some research that I wrote when I was at Gartner and combined it with Deloitte's public domain value map and turned it into this thing called the Business Impact Roadmap. And we won't have time today to go into excruciating detail around it, but this is sort of the mid-level of what it looks like. So that's the top-level Deloitte value map there on the left. The right is a representation of a spreadsheet we use, and where we start off with just brainstorming around what the end result of the business benefits are. And Mark's very good at going out and identifying whether something's a real business benefit or it's just an infrastructure enhancement, for example. And we end up with sort of a fragmented thing like this. But very quickly, what we do is get to something that's got all four of these aspects: calculation, context, connection, and commitment, well filled out for it. So for example, are we able to figure out how we would quantify this? What's context does it have to take place in? Who owns it? Who's going to verify this? All of that. What's it connected to? Is it connected to a big ERP re-engineering or a CRM implementation or some other core system, either being implemented or sunset potentially? It's not just about putting things in. Sometimes it's about taking things out. And finally, has it been signed off on? Have all the appropriate business and IT stakeholders said, yes, this is important, and we're going to make sure it follows through to completion? The reason that's important, it's not just to get everybody to buy in and to prioritize and everything else, and then to proceed forward and get fully funded. It's also a good protection against sort of external events, like a business sponsor leaves the company or gets promoted, or your company gets bought or buys somebody else. This is your yardstick to say, this is what this is worth. So unless somebody comes up with something that's worth more, we should think long and hard before we slow it down or stop it. And again, that's a very real thing that happens. Often the loss of an executive sponsor, and the more effective they were, the worse this is in terms of effect. Again, this sort of ratified thing where you could say, well, yeah, but when they were here, they said this is what this is worth. So we should really think before we, again, change the priority of this or defund it in any way, either partially or entirely. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this part of the talk. And I will now take a few moments and I will switch over to Prasad Gadik from Compunnel Digital, who will introduce himself.
Thank you, Bill. Let me switch to my screen. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bill, particularly for that very detailed explanation of the three myths. I know that some of them already know about these myths, but it needed special attention and detailed explanation, because they continue to be there and people are still not clear about them. Just a second. So Compunnel Digital has been in existence for 25 years. We have been doing a lot of help to our customers in terms of services, staffing, as well as in providing solutions. And I personally have been an associate of Compunnel for 26 years. So I'm a veteran here, and I am also the practice lead for the entire data practice, which includes the MDM practice. So why did I choose Profisee as our partner, for Compunnel? Why did Compunnel choose it? Exactly the points that we talked about. It's most MDMs can offer better business benefits with multi-domain MDMs. Even if you start with one single domain, like Bill mentioned already, you are not going to reap many benefits out of it. You have to add other domains to see, particularly the relationships between them become very important, and you can see that only if you implement multiple domains. If you implement only one domain, you are doing one type of modeling, and there are limited reference data. It's implementing two MDMs for two domains doesn't make any sense. The relationships between the two of them, its two domains, is not going to be visible in one single area, and now you have two systems, and it's really not beneficial. The cost of the Profisee MDM is within the range of our market segment that we target, and it is I'm talking about literally 5 to 10 times, depending on how much data volume you have, at least 5 times less than the regular, high profile, very well-known MDMs that you see there. And the other thing is that it does have all the core essential capabilities that you need to implement an MDM, including the working with data stewards, the workflows, and also you have the flexibility to do in an iterative way, in agile approach. So the agile approach should be chosen based on the business benefits that you want to derive, not based on how much license, how much I have money for buying a license. Rather, okay, in these sprints, I will, in an agile way, I will provide these business benefits, and then I will have next set of benefits. Then I will enhance the data model. So you get to a comprehensive data model gradually. You start with a smaller model based on the initial business benefits you want to get. So you can prioritize your business benefits that you want to get out of the MDM implementation. And it does, the way of doing this implementation in coordination with business, it does bring that business and IT collaboration aspect into the equation. And I would say that is what makes a difference between a successful MDM and an MDM that is left unused, and you don't get the funding for the next level that you want to go to. So that's Compunnel has a lot of capabilities around MDM. We are really good in it, and a lot of experience is there. We can share some case studies, and I would welcome anybody who is interested in inquiring further. And at this time, may please ask questions to either Bill or me.
Again, I'd like to thank Prasad for presenting with me today. It's been an honor, and thanks to Compunnel Digital as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the next webinar. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day.